I wanted to revisit this video from some fan prompting. I think I watched it like last year. And I'm a pretty big proponent of UBI. I'm a bit more matured in my perspective. This is like 2 years old, though, I think. For all I know, Hassan could have changed his perspective. I don't know. I looked it up, and the most recent video I have is like from like 6 months ago, where he says, I forgot what one of the talking points that he had said in this video, from what I remember. And I think that was that you need to do UBI on top of like the current welfare system, which I disagree with. So I'm going to assume his position hasn't changed. Maybe he doesn't take it as seriously. So that's just for context. I don't think he's changed his perspective, but it's possible that he has. So let's watch through this. Let's have a little fun. You know, let's have some fun dialogue. Hi, honey. You looked extremely hot when you flexed your muscles. Is that true? Well, let's give some people on YouTube a little bit of the boom, a little bit of the gun show. How's that, guys? Not editing that out. Mostly because I'm lazy.
I think I'm going to have to do a full-blown UBI stream starting from this point on.
Okay, guys, this is very low.
What I think
so I'm going to turn myself down a little bit.
What kinds of UBI that I like, what kinds of UBI I don't like,
there we go.
why I specifically have issues with Andrew Yang's UBI perspective, and why I have an issue with Andrew Yang in general for the 20...
Because he's Asian. Confirmed racism. I figured it out.
20th fucking time for all of the newcomers, so that everyone can shut the fuck up and go watch that whenever they have an issue with what I have to say.
Oh, okay. So he's actually saying that this is his like end all be all take on UBI. Maybe this is like absolutely accurate. He hasn't changed in 2 years.
Okay.
On stream, guys, I turned
so let's get started.
Myself down a little bit. Hopefully,
Hassan Piker, do not have an issue with universal basic income.
Me neither. I love UBI. Very
the only reason why I am skeptical of universal basic income is because of the motives historically that certain politicians have had and certain political theorists have had in advancing universal basic income.
What is that?
An idea first advanced by Milton Friedman.
What's wrong with what's
the father of right-wing libertarianism here in America?
I mean, I'm not educated on Milton Friedman's. I'm pretty sure, and I watched a little bit of like Thomas Sowell, Milton Friedman. I'm pretty sure that he just thought that welfare in its current state is shit, and that we're better off simplifying it and just giving people money. I also think he was for, I forget what it's called. He's for like a form of UBI. I think I forget exactly what it's called. You guys probably know in the chat, but it's like scaling with your level of employment or how much money you make. It's a negative income tax. I think that's his version, which I'm kind of against. Yeah, negative income tax. One of the biggest things that I like about UBI is that it's unconditional and everybody gets the same amount regardless of how well you're doing. To me, which to me is a good thing, because right now our current welfare system, I think one of the biggest problems is that the conditions that it tries to work against, it ends up advocating for, right? So when you tell people if you make too much money, you'll lose your welfare, they're going to try not to make too much money because obviously they don't want to lose their safety net. If you tell people they get more money for having more kids, they're going to have more kids. It even boils down to like, you know, when people are on permanent disability, when they've lost like their jobs, these are people who feel like they can't even go outside or else they'll lose their disability, which hurts them mentally and physically, their physical and mental health. And so an unconditional UBI would take away a lot of these worries. A negative income tax is better than a current welfare state, but it still has, since it scales up, I feel like there will still be a little bit of that trap where it incentivizes you to be a little poorer because you'll make more money or you'll get subsidized in some capacity. I still think that it's better than what we have now, but I'm more for like just a regular old $1,000 a month Andrew Yang UBI. That's kind of where I'm at.
As a legislative effort was,
but I don't know what was Milton Friedman UBI motivation. Like, I don't think that it was like I hate black people or something. Like, what was his motivation for his UBI? I don't understand.
Also pushed by Richard Nixon's administration.
Oh, so he's not going to say
Democrats
why.
At the time were vehemently against it. Now, you should be thinking at this point, wait a minute, Hassan.
Well, why did they do that?
UBI seems like a very woke thing. Why did Democrats at the time have a problem with universal basic income?
Yeah, so Milton Friedman was a staunch economic conservative that despised big government and social programs. He brought it to the middle. Yeah, I agree, kind of. Yeah, no, I agree. I I don't like the overcomplication of the federal government. I think that the more complicated our systems get, the less that they actually help, end up creating more problems. So something very basic and simple, giving people the power to have like their own financial autonomy, I think is a great idea, and I think it helps a lot of marginalized groups.
That makes no,
because right now, like, we have so many programs, like, for instance, like, we're subsidizing so many different things, even like schooling. And I'm not saying schooling is bad, but what I'm saying is that, like, we have this idea that, like, we can prescribe the solution for marginalized groups. It's like, yo, if you just go to school, well, maybe that's not what those individuals need. Maybe some individuals need to make their own choices about what's best for them. Maybe they need to work a lower skilled job to work their way up. I don't live in the community, so for me to be like, you have to go to school to be successful, seems like saviorism, right? Like, I don't know your struggle. Here's some money to help your local economy and help you and incentivize you to work, and you do the rest for yourself because you're an individual with a fucking brain and you have the ability to make your own decisions. That's what it really stems down to with me. We need to stop prescribing solutions to people that we don't actually know. And like, this is an issue with a lot of progressives, is that they think that they understand the issues of like any marginalized group, but they really don't. They don't understand the complexity of these issues. And they pretend that they do, so that they prescribe solutions to that, but they don't actually know. So those solutions end up having a negative impact.
no damn sense. Okay? And by the way, thank you, Warger, for thinking this is from a Wikipedia article. This is from the top of my mind. The
Maybe
reason
you should
why
have looked
I
up
can
Wikipedia.
speak on this matter as though I am reading from a Wikipedia article is because I've talked about this approximately a gajillion fucking times.
Well, you
So,
still didn't tell us
Andrew Yang
why. Wait, he
has
didn't even tell us.
three
He didn't even
main-
tell us what the problem with. He just said like Richard Nixon and Milton Friedman, and Richard Nixon is, my understanding, rather racist. But like, you can't just say, hey, because he's racist, it's a bad idea. You could have gave us like a general insight on why you thought that UBI was bad, but you just said people I think are bad. Bad people support UBI, so UBI equals bad. But there were bad people who supported things like, I don't know, like, right, communism? I mean, Stalin? Unless you're like a Stalin apologist. Isn't that kind of shitty? Isn't it just shitty rhetoric?
main points on his own website in regards to why we need a UBI and how we will be paying for this UBI structure. Okay? I'm going to open up Andrew Yang's website now. How would we pay for universal basic income? Now, before we get even further into this, I want to point this out. Universal basic income, in the way that I advocate for, is a drastic wealth redistribution program.
What does that mean?
I think that universal basic income is yet another band-aid solution that does not address all of the existing integral problems within capitalism that create class antagonism, that create a conflict amongst the working class, the proletariat, and the capitalists, the owners of capital.
What does that mean?
Welfare programs only...
Well, what does that mean? Like, I mean, that's a lot of buzzwords. Hey, capitalism's bad. I get it, but like, what does that mean though? Like, what exactly is the way that you would do it?
Exist to continue. These are government reforms that exist to continue capitalist structures all around the world, and therefore are not actually a foolproof, complete solution to the issues.
Oh, okay. So now I think I understand. So because capitalism would be maintained, it's bad. That's the whole foundation of this argument. So the UBI is bad because it actually functions within capitalism. Now, me personally, I understand that there are abusive aspects of capitalism, but I like capitalism. I think that overall it's good. I think it's good that we have a lower and an upper class that you can move yourself out of based on how valuable you are to society, whether you're somebody who works harder or somebody who just happens to be lucky based on whatever circumstances. Maybe you're just biologically better at something, or maybe you've had better schooling so that you're better equipped to help the economy and grow the country. But I don't think that we should have like such terrible poor people who live on the streets. I think everybody should ideally have like a comfortable place to live and some reasonable necessities met. But I'd like to do it in a very simple way, which is just give people money rather than tell people what their money is for. I don't see any need for us to micromanage these types of things. If you're somebody who thinks that we should guarantee housing, wouldn't it make more sense to just give people money for that thing so that they can purchase it themselves? Like, why micromanage this? It comes from like the perspective of like, would you rather have a $30,000 car or $30,000? I'd rather have $30,000 because I can do whatever I want or need to do with that money rather than you giving me what I need. But anyway, this is just an anti-capitalist thing. Like, we get it. Capitalism sucks. Unfortunately, communism has never worked. I know that communists will say, well, we never tried it truly. It's like, well, in an ideal world, that's true, but you can't keep moving the goalposts. It's been tried, and it fails every time, unfortunately. So this is, we're kind of at the capitalism might be the best we've gotten. Although there's, in these, what do you call them, Nordic countries, they're doing pretty well too. I think that they have different unique problems, but if we could copy their model, that'd be great. But I think America's not quite there yet. I think that at the end of the day, we all have unique issues, and fundamentally, we're just trying to help poor people. UBI, I think, helps poor people, right? I think that's a better way to go. I think, we have a lot of complex, like, for instance, in these other countries, they have really robust unions, which would be great. I don't think that we could practically implement that. And that might be because of oppressive, like, businesses. Well, it probably is, yeah. But it's just, practically speaking, would it be better? Maybe. It'd be better if we could guarantee employment for more people and pay people better and not have such abusive profits. I don't think profits are inherently abusive, but I think that we're just simply not there in America. I think our next step is a UBI for us, for what our specific problems that we have.
They just breathe life back into a capitalist structure that is slated for self-destruction. UBI is an inevitability, and is the latest inevitability in that same series of reforms that the government has made because of automation. Andrew Yang understands this reality, among other economists who also advocate for similar payment structures. Andrew Yang uses the example of truckers and how they will be devastated by automation.
Yeah.
To advocate for UBI, and I like his example of truckers, and I think his example of truckers reigns true for all other matters of industry that are slated to be destroyed in its entirety by automation and also artificial intelligence, and what PricewaterhouseCoopers and all of these other fucking consultant agencies are calling Industry 4.0. However,
yeah, well, those things are happening because of technological advancement now. I would attribute that to capitalism. Obviously, capitalism is the best, right? But, like, even if you lived in some kind of a communist country, if you had all these technological advances, there would still be less of this work for people. So, I don't know. I mean, we would still need to do some kind of, like, a guaranteed plan.
However, the way Andrew Yang wants to pay for UBI is not good. The reason why I don't like it, number one, before we even get into the VAT, is because of this problem here. Andrew proposes funding UBI by consolidating some welfare programs and implementing a value-added tax of 10%.
Yeah.
Current welfare and social program beneficiaries would be given a choice between their current benefits or $1,000 cash unconditionally.
I think that's great.
Most would prefer cash with no restriction.
True. Very true.
Now, the reason why I have an issue with this is because Andrew Yang correctly points out all of the existing problems that the working poor are facing under our current capitalist structure, even with the existence of welfare programs that aren't doing enough to uplift these people out of these dire material conditions that they're subjected to.
So here's the thing. Simply put, the fact that there are fewer and fewer jobs is what's kind of causing this to happen, right? Automation is displacing menial labor jobs. Those are the jobs that poor people need to do because poor people generally don't have the access to be skilled laborers. So they need unskilled labor to generate income so that they can support themselves, create a family, and have their family be a little bit better off than them, and then just kind of continue the process. That's how it's been historically. With jobs being displaced by automation, fewer and fewer of those opportunities exist. And so our current conditional welfare state, like I said before, has conditions that are impossible to get out of because there isn't enough solid employment. We have a lot of unhealthy local economies that don't have the opportunity for people to get off welfare. So what you do is you implement a universal basic income, because then that's direct money going in from the people into the communities. That opens up more people to work for lower wages because now they're getting like basically a subsidized wage. It opens people up to make more risks, to open up their own businesses because now they actually have a wage where traditionally you don't get any income for like 5 years if you're a business owner. It gives more people spending power. It gives people the ability to work for businesses, open up their own businesses. It's going to cause other corporate or businesses to gravitate towards that area. I know that all corporations are probably bad, Hassan, but it's not a bad thing to bring employment to areas. It'll get rid of a lot of our food shortages. It will open up a lot more supermarkets. It's just going to be overall better, and it's not going to be conditional. Whereas something like a 15 an hour minimum wage is very impractical, especially in poorer areas, right? Because there are people who are very dependent on welfare. And so people who are dependent on welfare, there's two types of people on welfare. There's people who are just on welfare, and there are people who are working are on welfare. The 15 an hour minimum wage ideology is that if you pay people more, there's more money in the system. Well, in these poorer areas where there's people on welfare, there's people on just purely welfare don't get any more money, right? And people who are on welfare and work, if they get more money, they're going to lose their welfare. And so these are the the conditions of our welfare system that just simply don't work. And that's why something like a 15-hour minimum wage, which is pressed harder by leftists nowadays, is so flawed, whereas a universal basic income would be better. It would make more sense, and it would be better for poor people. The conditionality of our welfare system is garbage, and we need to replace it. And that's not to say we should just up and throw it out. I mean, this is a great way to transition. If you want to stay, you stay. If you want to move on, you move on. Wouldn't that devalue the dollar? Yeah, sure. It would cause inflation, but it wouldn't be like this drastic inflation that would kill the value of a dollar. I think a value-added tax of 10% has an estimated inflation rate of about 6%. More money in the market means that, like, yes, things are going to cost a little bit more. But I'm not. When it comes to living spaces, I would say that would be an issue. I could see property managers abusing people, and in that case, I would say that if there is an abusive property manager who decides to massively inflate the cost to live at an apartment, then maybe the government buys it up and either resells it or runs it itself. But outside of that, like when you're day to day, when there's competition, like, if there's McDonald's, Burger King, and Taco Bell in an area, Taco Bell's not going to double its price because they're just going to lose competitors to Burger King, McDonald's. I know I could have used a better example, but I'm obese. But you understand the point. There's more competition in that context, and this is going to breed more competition because more companies are going to go into areas, especially with fewer businesses, because there's going to be a lot more money going through the economy, right? $1,000 a month, everybody 18 and older. I mean, of course, businesses are going to chase that. They're going to chase the bag, dog. You know what I'm saying?
However, for some reason, his policy proposal isn't to give them another additional $1,000 in
it's too expensive
basic income, but a substitution if they already have existing, if they're already getting some sort of payment or some sort of benefits from the existing welfare structure. I have an issue with this.
Well, you can't. For two things. One, you can't afford it. He'll probably say something like tax the rich more. I don't think that we can just tax the rich into oblivion. I know that listen, maybe we could tax the rich a ton more and it would just solve all our problems. I kind of doubt it. We do need to get the rich to pay their fair share, but that doesn't mean that just taxing the rich is just like an easy prescription to solve all the problems. Right now, I think $2.5 trillion of the $3 trillion headline cost of UBI is taken care of based on Andrew Yang's plan. A third of that $2.5 trillion is getting people off of their current welfare system. So adding an additional $800 billion onto this $3 trillion cost, I don't think that we can pay for it. Again, from a human perspective, and I think this is one of the problems, I don't think Hassan has talked to regular people, no offense. It's going to reduce the incentive to come off of their welfare. Like, if I was getting $1,000 a month from the government through whatever welfare programs, and then I got an extra 1,000, why would I work? I would be a fucking moron, right? That's how a lot of people on welfare are going to think, and I don't blame them, right? We have to keep in mind the human condition, whether that's an inherent human condition or some kind of a socially constructed human condition. The way people are on welfare, like, why the fuck would you work? So they're not going to work. People aren't altruistic. A lot of people are looking to chase that bag from the government because they're frustrated with the government. I don't blame them. But they're not just going to do the right thing and go, you know what? Let me just get back to work. This is not going to happen. It's not going to happen.
A universal basic income should not be a substitute for any other social policies that are already set in place. A universal basic income would And by the way, Andrew's $1,000 proposal might come across as generous, especially when considering like the middle of America, but would fall significantly short of what the reality is and what
the average welfare payment is $400 a month. Are there going to be areas where people are getting more than that? Sure, they get to keep it, but then there are other people. So here's the thing: let's say you have an area that doesn't exist, but let's say that everybody was on welfare that they got more than $1,000 a month. Well, this area doesn't exist, but then their kids will be able to hit 18 and get $1,000 a month and start using that to get a job. So, like, even if you directly don't benefit from getting the UBI because you're making more on welfare, the other people around you having more money is going to allow that money to go into the economy more and more. And the distinct difference between this and what we talked about before, because I had described it a 15-hour minimum wage, is that this doesn't ravage businesses. This is a nationwide redistribution of wealth. Yes, it has a value-added tax, but a value-added tax of 10% on a small business isn't as bad as doubling the cost of labor, regardless of whether you make more money or not, right? The cost of labor in businesses is 20 to 35%. Imagine a small business paying 35% of their income, their gross income, and then doubling that, and then saying good luck. Rather than, like, what would you rather have? Would you rather double your 35% labor cost, or have your products cost 10% more, and you get $1,000 a month, and all your employees get $1,000 a month, so you don't have to worry about paying them more? That's the difference between the two. That's why I think UBI is a better direction to go.
What is necessary in places like Los Angeles or heavily urbanized areas. But that's an entirely different conversation, and we won't be getting into that.
You probably should.
The reason why I have an issue with this is, and the reason why I brought up Milton Friedman and Richard Nixon in the beginning of why Americans wanted UBI, or right-wingers and libertarians have always been a fan of UBI.
I think it's financial autonomy. I think it's the understanding that the government trying to micromanage everything has a negative impact. So that's something like a very simple solution that allows people to have the financial capabilities to handle their own problems rather than the government telling them what problems they should get handled. That's probably why. That's what I would say.
Because of this very important distinction. Okay?
Oh, because they recognize that our current welfare system is fucked. Like, UBI is still a welfare system. I don't understand. It's just an unconditional one.
Right-wingers and libertarians want to utilize UBI to justify destroying existing social programs.
But this isn't destroying. This is like a reasonable transition. Like, you could just stay on your... Like, this is giving people the choice. I don't understand. It's like, I guess to Hassan, if you ask somebody, hey, would you rather have $1,000 a month or your current welfare stipulations? And they said, I would rather have $1,000 a month. To Hassan, that's abusive, even though the person willingly relinquished it.
And privatizing
so it's
the
very
already
interesting.
crippled social safety nets that Americans have scarce access to. A country like Finland advocating for...
But you wouldn't need that.
UBI, as Nave the Shade just pointed out, is entirely different than a country like America.
Right, so Finland doesn't have the same issues as us. Finland has a healthier economy, probably, right? Like, they have better wealth redistribution. UBI is just a different tool than what Finland uses to create the same impact. That's kind of it. We're a different country with a different set of problems. That's it. That's really what it comes down to. So whereas Finland, I believe, has like really robust unions, which is a huge thing, and they have better they have better taxes and whatnot. We don't have those things, and those are difficult to achieve. And part of that is because of abusive members within our country. But UBI is something that we could implement and work around that. That's the whole point. It's just a different solution to the similar problem that America still has, right? And it's a realistic and practical one. I think that we're there. And I can think if conservatives are okay with a UBI and progressives are too, then that's a good compromising solution for us to work towards.
For UBI.
But I think that somebody being right-wing and libertarian to Hassan is an insult. So he doesn't really have to elaborate on that perspective. He just has to say, well, you're a right-wing and you're a libertarian, so you're a bad person. So if I say that you're a right-winger, parentheses derogatory, then I've won the argument.
Our social programs currently are in dire need of funding.
I think we should just change
Anything
them.
that jeopardizes their existence is an absolute threat that needs to be eradicated.
Bro, this is insane. This is just a different form of welfare that's unconditional. It gives people power. This gives people more power. It makes it so people don't have to always vote Democrat, because Democrats are the ones always talking about expanding welfare. If anything, it keeps them off of the political dependency. Like, it's still a governmental dependency because the government gives you this UBI, but since it's unconditional, like, you don't have to be held hostage by one party who says that they're going to help and then barely does. I don't understand. This is just like a cleaner way to do welfare. How are you talking about how much you hate this version of welfare because you want to maintain the version of welfare that's not working that well? I don't understand it.
This is why I'm terrified of anyone who proposes UBI and then turns around and says, well, we're only going to give the UBI on the condition that we take away the welfare spending. So that's...
But UBI is welfare, right? If you just call it welfare, it ruins your whole argument, because UBI is a welfare program. It's just an unconditional one. So if you acknowledge that factor, then all of a sudden you'd be like, yeah, I'm really hesitant of people who want to destroy welfare to implement welfare. You see how silly it sounds when you put it into perspective?
One. Number two, how will we pay for it, says Andrew Yang, with a value-added tax.
Yeah.
Now this is most similar to a sales tax.
Yeah, it's a sales tax that, my understanding, it just makes it difficult for companies to dodge, which is a good idea.
Some people say that this would be a progressive tax.
Nobody says that. Nobody says that it'll be a progressive tax. It is quite definitionally a regressive tax.
I think that a value-added tax, just like a sales tax, would still hurt the working poor and middle-class Americans.
So hurt is an interesting thing. If we were just implementing a VAT, then yeah, sure. But since UBI would be given to it in exchange, it would still be a net positive. Now, would it hurt poor people more than rich people? Sure. But but UBI would help poor people more than rich people. My focus isn't to hurt rich people. My focus is to help poor people. Now, obviously, rich people are going to have to be hurt in the obviously going to have money taken from them, so it's going to hurt them. But the focus is on helping poor people, right? So let's say, I mean, honestly, let's say universal base. Let's just be so simple. Let's say you evaluate a tax of 10%, despite the fact that it wouldn't include like clothing and like unprepared foods, I believe. Let's say it increased all of your costs by like 10%, and you're a poor dude and you make $20,000 a year and you pay all $20,000 of your income to live. And let's say the cost of everything that you are paying for goes from $20,000 to $22,000. Well, now you're losing $2,000 a year, except you're also getting $12,000 a year. So you're actually gaining $10,000 a year. It's very simple. Now, is a value-added tax perfect? Maybe not. Maybe we could have conversations about some kind of a progressive VAT tax where you tax small businesses like 5% and big businesses like 20% or something. It's not really a bad idea. Fundamentally, I think we need to work more towards VAT taxes and away from corporations paying traditional taxes. Not because I don't think that corporations should pay taxes, but at the end of the day, I probably shouldn't have gotten into this complicated conversation, but let's just go into it. Okay, so with a value-added tax, let's say it's at 20%. What's happening is that, let's say a business charges $1 for a particular good. So a good is $1, and then they decide to VAT tax it 20%. Okay, now the consumer is paying $1.20, the business is getting $1, and the government's getting 20%. Let's say instead of doing that, we just implemented like a business tax of 20%. Now what's happening? They're going to pass that cost along to the consumer. The consumer's paying $1.20, the business is getting $1, and the government's getting 20%. Our framing of the way that we look at money and expenditures is bizarre. We're comfortable with taxing businesses, but we're not as comfortable with taxing the consumer, when at the end of the day, it's the same result. The consumer pays a price, the government gets a bit of money, and the business gets some money. Now, obviously, we have to prevent wealth hoarding as well in these businesses, but I think that if we try to switch towards like a VAT tax, those are more difficult to dodge than our current system. The government is These big businesses are dodging taxes, and what's happening is they're dodging taxes. They're working these loopholes, which for whatever reason we can't fucking close. And then what are we doing? We're auditing them. We're not able to actually get more money from them, so we're spending money on audits, and they're dodging their taxes anyway. So switching towards something like a VAT tax, maybe a progressive VAT tax where you tax bigger businesses more. Maybe that's the way of the future. A slow transition towards that, while also implementing some form of a tax to make sure a business doesn't hoard too much of its wealth. Sorry for that tangent.
It is regressive taxation, and
like you know, just because something bad exists, just because a thing is flawed, doesn't mean that it should die, right? Like everything is flawed. Like, you know, no good deed goes unpunished is something that I live by. It doesn't really matter what you do. There's always going to be a pros and a cons, and it's always going to be relative. So like, oh, a VAT tax is bad, we shouldn't do UBI. Well, what if we realize that we're people that have the ability to advocate, and then you created your own ideal advocation for UBI? I don't think that you're interested in that, though. I think that you're more interested in just like going right to like communism or something, which is generally impractical. Even if the goalpost sounds nice, I don't think that there's a practical way to get there. But now I'm rambling.
Majority of it might still be funded by the wealthy who are making big ticket purchases, but ultimately the poor would still be paying for this UBI.
Wait, you just said like, yeah, the wealthy would probably be paying more into it, but since poor people still pay into it, I don't like it. Well, who cares if the rich are paying more by your own admission?
Not only are you trying to move them away from the welfare and SNAP benefits that they already.
Why do you need a SNAP benefit of $200 a month when you're getting $1,000 a month? You and your spouse. If you're or like, let's say you're a husband and wife, or two husbands or two wives, or whatever you would call non-binary people, two-parent traditional-ish household with two genders, whatever the fuck, I don't give a shit. That's $2,000 a month. That's your SNAP benefits. That's a car payment. That's a babysitter so that you can work. That's one of you maybe being able to quit your job so that you can pay more attention to your kid. What's wrong with that?
Have limited access to. But then you're also saying, hey, you're going to pay a little bit more, but you're getting $1,000.
Yeah, that's great.
The only UBI that I would be in favor of
it's pretty pog.
Is one that is exclusively funded by corporations.
Okay.
And exclusively funded by taxing the wealthy.
Here's the thing. I don't think that we get all the money from doing that. I don't think that there would be enough money coming from the wealthy to do that. All right. And even if there was, in an ideal world, it's not going to happen. Well, in our world, it's not going to happen because the rich aren't going to give it that much power. It's the reality, which is what I'm saying. I'm more focused on solving these problems and emboldening the poor than I am hurting the rich. The rich do control a lot more than they should, but it's a factor. And if we're trying to make progress, we need to work within our current system. So, hey, let's just implement this system. But a lot of that money's tied up in stocks, which, according to my partner, is stocks are a thing that stupid men do that only stupid men understand. And I guess I don't even understand it. So I guess I'm extra stupid. So I don't think I think that most of us understand taxes, stocks. Let's be honest.
Any UBI proposal that tries to back itself by taxing the working poor and taxing middle-class Americans is not going to work. So this is the second reason.
No, but again, like he's just saying it's not going to work. If you made $50,000 a year, and you paid $50,000 in expenses, and a UBI raised your expenses to $55,000, but you're getting an extra $12,000. You're getting $7,000 more a year. It sounds like it's working. Just simply, it's working. Based on your concerns.
A significant issue. Why I take issue with Andrew Yang's.
It doesn't really seem like there's any like critical thought about this. It just seems like, hey, I don't like things that make me uncomfortable. I don't want to look into anything. So I'm going to say it's bad because I sound virtuous saying that it's bad.
UBI proposal. Okay? And then he goes further into current spending. He says we currently spend between $500 and $600 billion a year on welfare programs, food stamps, disability, and the like. This reduces the cost of universal basic income because people already receiving benefits would have a choice but would be ineligible to receive the full $1,000 in addition to current benefits. Again, remember, this is important. A UBI proposal would only work. Even with this modest amount that he's suggesting, it would only work if it was not a substitution, but an additional.
You know, it wouldn't work at all, actually. You're proposing the failure of our system. You know what's interesting? I don't even think he brings this up. The best criticism, or one of the best criticisms for UBI, is that since the costs of goods are going to go up. People that are already on existing welfare programs may not be able to sustain themselves because now the cost of their goods has gone up. If you thought about this critically, you could go, you know what, the VAT tax would put an additional stressor on people who are already on welfare, and it would hurt their position on welfare, right? So, like, if you're making $2,000 a month on welfare and you don't want to go to UBI, and the cost of your stuff goes up, then all of a sudden it's like, oh, okay, we're hurting people on welfare currently. Maybe we should figure out a solution for that. But he doesn't even think critically enough about it. Or maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm going to eat my own words as we watch this to come up with the actual problems of UBI. He just likes to invent ones.
$1,000 on top of the existing welfare structure that we have. Of that, we already talked about and why that would be bad. New
Not
revenue.
really. You didn't. You literally said that. Yeah, rich people probably pay more than the poor people, but poor people shouldn't have to pay anything. That was your whole perspective. Like, who gives a shit? As long as people are strengthened.
Hands of American consumers would grow the economy. This I don't disagree with. This is like Keynesian economics. It's not something that I disagree with at all. I think that giving more money, allowing poor people to uplift themselves or to get out of poverty,
it's
by
smarter.
simply giving them money is a good idea. They would consume more
Yeah.
than the wealthy would. This is understandable. I don't have an issue with that perspective.
That's almost the entire foundation of UBI. So, like, that's the main part of UBI. That's the interesting thing. And he's like, yeah, that part's good. Like the 80% of UBI is giving people unconditional money so that they can make their own financial decisions and empower themselves. But the 20% he has an issue with, right? Like the 80-20 rule. He's like, I know that fundamentally this is perfect, but I don't like that poor people have to pay into it a little bit, even though they're getting twice as much revenue.
The Roosevelt Institute projected that the economy would grow by approximately $2.5 trillion and create 4.6 million new jobs. This would,
as opposed to the loss of 1.4 million jobs on a $15 an hour minimum wage,
generate approximately 500 to 600 billion in new revenue from economic growth and activity. I agree. That's a good idea. I don't have an issue with that. Let's talk about what I agree as far as, or like what kind of UBI proposals I am in favor of.
I think you've already said.
Now that I described to you
terrible.
why I don't like Andrew Yang's perspective. Now, you guys might remember Rutger Bregman. He wrote an entire book about UBI. He is famous for, he recently went viral when he was at Davos, and he turned around and fucking shat directly in the faces of billionaires who were also at that conference.
I think I know who that is.
Talking about the hypocrisy.
Yeah, this guy's pretty cool. This guy.
Of how billionaires advocate for climate change, and yet 1,500 private jets flew into Davos.
Yeah, sure.
And he talks about how no one at Davos, for some weird reason, talks about the issue of tax avoidance, which is a gigantic contributor to economic inequality.
Well, that's the thing, and that's one of Andrew Yang's positions on the VAT tax. It's hard to avoid that tax for businesses. And I went into a whole spiel before about how the VAT tax would be more effective at collecting taxes from bigger businesses, which is why maybe we should implement a progressive VAT tax where you tax larger businesses more and smaller businesses less. We can come up with these fun solutions, but that's the whole point. It's literally to try to counteract tax avoidance. And I don't know, I would kind of expect you to understand that looking into the policy. I won't give you too much shit for it, but this is something that was addressed by Andrew Yang with the VAT tax.
Gigantic contributor to the wealth disparity that we are currently experiencing, unlike any other period in throughout history.
Wait. Is he being serious about that? Is that a joke?
Economic inequality. It's a gigantic contributor to the wealth disparity that we are currently experiencing, unlike any other period in throughout history.
Wait. I feel like that can't be true. It can't be true that we have more wealth disparity now than 100 years ago. And if we do, it's because the world's just richer. But the quality of life of a poor person now is objectively better than the quality of life of a poor person like 150 years ago. I feel like this is like a weird, like the fundamentals of that is like we're worse off than we've ever been. The poorest people in America are better off than the poorest people in America 100 years ago. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't from a relative perspective, embolden poorer people, because if the quality of life of rich people has gone up, then the quality of life of poor people should go up. I think everything should say like relative, but like still we're doing better. Like I would rather be poor now than poor then, like 150 years ago. This is weird, but he's trying to say like we've never been worse off. Well, what I feel like we've always been worse off. Like this is the best that we've ever been in America, for the most part. This is a weird point to me.
Like,
this kind of feels like a little bit of like a, it's like a little bit like of a virtue signal. I don't know.
Medieval times, levels of wealth disparity.
I don't know. Maybe that's, I feel like it's not true. But even if it is true, and we do need to fix it for sure, 100%. We're still living better. So to just say that wealth disparity is the only factor, what about the value of or the quality of life of poor people now? It's something to consider.
Rutger Bregman, I like him because he also has a similar hairline to mine. So
I know you're all a bit depressed at the moment, so I thought, let's cheer us all up. Let's do an interview with a nice cheery optimist. This guy, Rutger Bregman.
Oh, are we just going to watch this video now? We're not going to... Oh, I guess this is just watching the video from Rutger. Okay.
Utopia for realists. So it's about how can we build a much better world than the one we currently have. He's got some great ideas. Basic income, that's one. Shorter working week, kitchen. Come on, everyone. This is fantastic stuff. So he's going to go into...
Yeah, I think that shorter work weeks are inevitable. I don't think we should forcefully implement them, but they're like inevitable for some jobs. Like, you know, if you implement a UBI, and then like, I don't know, fucking people desire... Because that's one of the not even negative, but that's one of the impacts of UBI studies that show people desire a shorter work week. But that's totally fine because employment, the availability of jobs is going down. So if we decide to do like a universal basic income and then everybody work 20 hours a week or 30 hours a week instead, but more people could work and make more money working, but then there was less overall work stress, that's great. Make more, work less. I think that's phenomenal. That's an inevitability. It's going to happen. Now, can you force it? I don't know if you can force it. There are probably some jobs that maybe you couldn't work that out depending on the circumstance. But like, yeah, I think that we should work towards a smaller work week. UBI, I think, would start that trend. In general.
To detail about these ideas, about how we could build, maybe, just maybe, a utopia. Some people think utopianism is inherently quite a dangerous idea. If you have this view of history of
this video is so much louder than Hassan himself.
Constant progress where you create this perfect society, that's been tried a few times and it's led to huge amounts of bloodshed, tyranny, totalitarianism, all used to justify the utopian ideal.
That's partly true. I mean, I was born in 1988. It was a year before the fall of the Berlin Wall.
You feel really old.
And what I was taught at university is that...
Holy shit, the dude, oh my god, that's literally my hairline in like fucking 3 years, by the way.
Is he going to talk any more about UBI, or was this was it? Now he's just watching
A third of the book was about UBI. The rest was about open borders and the 15-hour work week. Yes, Corbin grad, you are correct. I should have mentioned that. The entirety of the book is not about UBI, but he talks about how a utopia is actually pragmatic in his book, and he's going to elaborate on that right now in this interview. It's a really good one, so we're going to watch that. Yes, Rutger wears the same glasses as me, and he has the fucking same hairline as myself. It's fine. Yeah,
this is like really weird. Like, not to go off, but like very clearly Hassan doesn't have his hairline, and it sounds like Hassan likes to insult himself so that people will be like, "No, Hassan, you're so attractive." This is a little weird.
He's pretty damn cute. Shut the fuck up, everybody. I think he's doing fine. Hopefully, he doesn't get executed for speaking truth to power.
You shouldn't think in utopian terms anymore because it's dangerous. You know, we've all tried that, communism, fascism, and we're still counting the corpses, right? But I always had this nagging sense that we had lost something. I mean, democracy was utopian once as well. There are a few ideas which may seem utopian now, but may become reality in the future. The problem nowadays, especially on the left, is that it knows very well what it's against, but it doesn't really have an idea of what it's for. So it's basically against everything, against the...
That's true. Yep, that is true. I love it. Yes, he's saying that the left doesn't really have any direction. He's saying that it's against a lot of bad things, but it doesn't really have anything it fights for, which is kind of indicative. Hassan doesn't even understand the ultimate irony that, like, he's just against UBI for no fucking reason other than it makes him uncomfortable. He's the problem. Like, he's talking about him. He's criticizing him. Hey, you got to stand for something like practical, like a UBI. But even that,
austerity, against the establishment, against homophobia, against racism. And I'm not saying I'm not against all those things, but you also need to be for something.
Do you think he realizes how silly he looks watching this?
Where you want to go.
The point I'd often make is the left ended up in a very
Although he has the vision of communism, which is just a blanket term for I don't really know how to practically move our society forward in a reasonable step, so I'm going to advocate for an idealized version of the world that probably will never exist, and if it does, it won't exist for hundreds of years until we have been socially conditioned to actually function within the parameters of a system that doesn't really provide an incentive to work harder.
defensive posture. Why have we ended up so defensive and lacking in imagination of an alternative?
Moments of crisis are really, really important. Those are the moments that you can get new ideas into the bloodstream of thought, you know? The problem was that in 2008, with the financial crash, is that this was another moment of crisis where there should have been new ideas on the shelves, but they weren't there. And my hope is that with 2016, with Brexit and Trump, is that we've done more of our homework.
A lot of people watching this video, if I was to sum up their views, I think it's fair to say they would think everything's kind of going to pop. But you kind of challenge that, don't you?
Well, the big lesson of history is that in the past, everything was worse. We're still living in a period in history where we are incredibly wealthy, healthy, very safe, and we should be grateful for that. The second thing is that there are really exciting ideas out there right now that are gaining in popularity. I think the best example is the idea of universal basic income, which is completely eradicate poverty, and it's taking off.
We'll just talk about the history of kind of basic income, because as you point out, it was that well-known lefty, Richard Nixon, who experimented with the idea, didn't implement it. Rather than actually necessarily being something which just comes from the left of politics, it's Milton Friedman. He framed it more, maybe more as a negative income tax, but...
What are you humming for?
Now, any progressive who hears that should at least have a couple warning signs, a couple red flags immediately triggered by this new factoid that enters the marketplace of ideas.
So UBI is great until people that you don't align with politically also support it. That's a crazy ideology. Imagine hating people on the other side of the aisle so much that if they have an idea, you immediately strike it down simply because you disagree with just their existence. The majority of the United States isn't like really polarized left and right. That's just kind of how the media presents it, and this is an example of that. Most people are pretty in the middle. I would say I'm more of like probably a more progressive, like a moderate progressive. I've had conversations with almost every moderate conservative I've had a conversation with, I've sold on UBI. Like this isn't like something that we should be wary of. This is like a compromise that works for everybody. Unconditional money, reducing the current conditional welfare state that hurts a lot of people, dealing with technology, dealing with wealth redistribution, or like lack of like people getting paid enough, et cetera, et cetera. It's a compromise. We don't have to be hesitant. Like, I mean, you could be hesitant, but I have a feeling that Hassan doesn't get hesitant. He just dismisses things if there's negative or bad actors that support it.
It seems like Milton Friedman and Richard Nixon were.
And I don't even think Milton. I don't think that fucking Milton Friedman is a bad actor. From what I've seen, I don't agree with everything he says, but he's got some reasonable perspectives.
Big advocates for UBI. I wonder if UBI is not all that great, and it's more of a matter of who is advocating for it and how you'll pay for it.
De facto, very.
I think that Hassan's crafting a conspiracy theory.
It's basically the same. People from the left to the right, all the great economists, they all thought that this was going to happen. So not only Milton Friedman believed that, but also Martin Luther King. Nixon didn't think of it himself. He just wanted to make history. He thought, oh, this is an idea that everyone's buying into right now. Let's do it. So his proposal for a modest basic income got through Congress twice, and it was only shot down in the Senate because Democrats thought that his proposal wasn't high enough.
A lot of critics of basic income.
Interesting.
But they'll go, just make everyone lazy.
Well, what I found is that when you ask people, what would you do with a basic income, about 90% of people say, you know, I've got dreams, I'm going to do something useful with it.
It's true. Like, there's going to be people who are lazy on UBI, but jobs are disappearing. It really just doesn't matter, almost. It's just going to happen. You're going to have a ton of fucking neckbeard beta fucks sitting at home playing World of Warcraft and trying to be like the next Hassan. But overall, it's going to help out a lot. People are going to be helped quite a bit through this means.
Don't worry, I'm going to quit my bullshit job and it's going to be great. But if you then ask them, what would other people do with a basic
Yeah, I wonder if Hassan's regretting making this video now that it's already made.
income, about 90% of all people say, I know, other people, they'll probably waste it on drugs and alcohol, etc. And that's why I think you need to look at the evidence.
Even if that's true, even if it's true that people will spend on drugs and alcohol, we have to understand something. If you're like some kind of an addict, you're probably never going to recover without like a lot of help. You're probably not going to recover. And I don't say that to be rude. The reason is because we have kind of shitty ways to recover. A lot of our recovery programs centralize around religion, which is simply not an effective way to get people off of drugs. We haven't really changed that much. It's unfortunate. But I would say that UBI would prevent new people from going on to drugs. It will reduce the stresses of life. And so I think that it would be more of a deterrent for people to go on drugs rather than getting people off of it. And maybe they will spend more money on drugs and alcohol. It's just unfortunate. But not everything's perfect.
There's one famous experiment that was done in Canada in the 1970s. It went on for 4 years. They didn't have money left to analyze the results because a new conservative government had come into power and they said, what kind of crazy experiment is this? Stop it. And then 25 years later, a Canadian professor found the records, did the analysis, and discovered that it had been hugely successful. People didn't massively quit their jobs, that the hospitalization rate decreased by 8.5%, crime.
Yeah, and one of those things is going to be social conditioning. So when we implement UBI, you have to advocate for your kids to still want to be successful. A lot of this is still social, which is what we need to do.
And down, kids perform better at school. That's the thing we keep forgetting all the time.
What do you mean it doesn't work to religious to change the addict in a way? So the way that current addicts or the way that AA works is you have to basically pray to a higher power type of a thing. In the moment, it works because you're in a field, like when you're in jail, for instance, you're in a place where you're forced to be religious. But if your core ideology isn't religious based, it's not going to cause you to long-term stick with it. So if you come from a non-religious household and you go to a treatment facility and you get off of drugs and then you go home, you're not in the same environment that would help you stay away from drugs. So the fact that it's very heavily contingent on religion isn't a positive thing.
All the time. Poverty is hugely expensive in terms of higher healthcare,
true.
Crime, you name it.
Is one of the main
Think about it. If we reduce poverty, you won't need as much of a need for homeless shelters and a bunch of other shit that's very expensive, like healthcare costs. Yeah.
For basic income, technological change. One study suggests in Britain 11 million jobs could go, not just low-skill, semi-skilled jobs like before, but middle-class professional jobs. So is it now the case, do you think, that work is going to become more and more precarious, and that a basic income gives more jobs? Change.
Crime, you name it.
Is one of the main justifications for basic income.
Okay, I didn't hear it because it's going so fast.
One study suggests in Britain 11 million jobs could go, not just low-skill, semi-skilled jobs like before, but middle-class professional jobs. Yeah. So is it now the case, do you think, that work is going to become more and more precarious, and that a basic income gives more stability and security to a more insecure workforce? Is that one of the justifications?
People don't even realize this, but one of the reasons that truck drivers are making less and less money is because of the invention of a GPS. I know it sounds silly, but it becomes easier and less threatening or less nerve-wracking for people to become truck drivers because there's a technology that you can relax onto, which increases the amount of truck driver availability, which reduces the amount of pay per truck driver. It reduces the qualification because you don't need to be an expert on a roadmap when you have a fucking machine that's just going to tell you where to go anyway. We don't even realize that even these implementation of these of technologies makes work easier, but we don't even realize it because we're so conditioned onto things like a fucking GPS.
Yes, definitely. But I think that we underestimate capitalism's extraordinary ability to come up with new bullshit jobs. There's one poll that was done in 2014 that we underestimate
stability and security to a more insecure workforce. Is that one of the justifications?
Yes, definitely. But I think that we underestimate capitalism's extraordinary ability to come up with new bullshit jobs. There's one poll that was done in 2014 by YouGov that found that 37% of all British workers think they have a job that doesn't even need to exist. Now, I'm not...
Hold on. So he's talking about...
Yeah, but I think that's a good thing. I think capitalism does a great job at figuring out new jobs. People talk about work programs. I think we're better off with a UBI, putting money into the bottom and letting people do jobs that maybe they don't need. This job doesn't need to exist. It does though, because you guys have enough money to afford computers and to give me some money and watch advertisements and all that other stuff. So I think that bullshit jobs, I think it's fine to have bullshit jobs. It's better off to allow capitalism to create bullshit jobs, even if they're entertainment wise, than it is to force particular jobs.
About jobs, bullshit jobs that don't need to exist and whatever. I just want to go quickly to more important parts about.
Is he getting upset because his job was called bullshit?
What I was talking about before.
I think that Hassan's respect for this man's going down as he says practical and reasonable things. He's like, I don't like this. I'm getting upset.
So the idea is powered Earth, typical subject, Netherlands, migrants, utopian idea. He talks about how Geert Wilders is a utopian and his...
Oh, so he clearly watched this already, and it seems like he's getting... Did he forget what he watched?
His perspective.
I'm confused.
Why do the poor make so many poor decisions? I know it's a harsh question, but take a look at the data.
One of the reasons poor people make poor decisions is because a decision by a poor person that is a bad decision is only a bad decision because they're poor, right? Like if you really think about it, right? So if I went out right now and I blew $500 on a TV that I didn't have, since I have more money coming in, like it's not as bad of a deal. It's like, oh, okay, I made a bad decision, like I'll recoup. Poor people don't have the ability to recoup from bad decisions, which makes them worse decisions. And while yes, you could tell them to not make bad decisions, which they probably should, we could also advocate for giving them more of the means to make bad decisions and learn from those mistakes. Because if you make a bad call on accident and you can't recover from it, you're more likely to just like not give a shit about life anymore, which is kind of one of the things that ends up happening.
Or borrow more, save less, smoke more, exercise less, drink more, and eat less healthily. But the underlying assumption is the same. There's something wrong with that. It was an experiment with sugarcane farmers. You should know that these farmers collect about 60% of their annual income all at once, right after the harvest. And this means that they're relatively poor one part of the year and rich the other. And the researchers asked them to do an IQ test before and after the harvest. What they subsequently discovered completely blew my mind. The farmers scored much worse on the test before the harvest. The effects of living in poverty, it turns out, correspond to losing 14 points of IQ. Now, this narrows your focus to your immediate lack, to the sandwich you've got to have now, the meeting that's starting in 5 minutes, or the bills that have to be paid tomorrow. So the long-term perspective goes out the window. They're not making dumb decisions because they are dumb, but because they're living in a context in which anyone would make dumb decisions. Poverty is not a lack of character. Poverty is a lack of cash. We should stop sending shoes and teddy bears to the poor, to people we have never met.
That's fair. Just start sending them money.
It's a monthly grant, enough to pay for your basic needs: food, shelter, education. It's completely unconditional. Basic income is not a favor, but a right. The great thing about money is that people can use it to buy things they need, instead of things that self-appointed experts think they need.
Yes, thank you. That's exactly the point. This is, again, this is him criticizing Hassan. I does Hassan not see that he's being criticized? Like there are a lot of people who think these are what we call saviors. They think that they know what the needs are of particular groups, disadvantaged groups, and they don't, but they think that they do. And they think that because they think that they do, that they're woke. And they prescribe these solutions that have a negative impact on people. Let people make their own decisions on what they want to do with their money. That's the better way to go. All right, a fucking black kid in the projects knows more what to do with his money than the government does. So let's advocate for that kid having the ability to fix his own problems. Now, maybe those problems are made by the government, but like at the end of the day, it's better to give him the ability to fix it, because clearly, if the government caused the problem, you think that they're going to be able to fix it too? These issues are incredibly complex, so what you do is you give people a simple means to deal with those complex solutions. You give them the tools to deal with those solutions.
In Dauphin, Canada. In 1974, everybody in this small town was guaranteed the basic income. The experiment had been a resounding success. The people in Dauphin had not only become richer, but also smarter and healthier. The school performance of kids improved substantially. The hospitalization rate decreased by as much as 8.5%. Domestic violence incidents were down, as were mental health complaints.
Crazy.
And people didn't quit their jobs. Similar results have since been found in countless other experiments around the globe, from the US to India.
I'm not sure how much money they gave out. They could have been substantially less than like $1,000 a month. Probably was, but it's still fundamentally like if somebody said, "Hey, listen, we wouldn't do $1,000 a month, but we'll do $400 a month," I'd say, "Okay, let's do it." You know what I mean? Like it's compromise.
Spending 1% of GDP, you could lift all impoverished Americans above the poverty line. Just look at the cost of child poverty in the US, for example. It's estimated at $500 billion each year. In terms of higher healthcare spending, higher dropout rates, and more crime, you could actually eradicate poverty. Now that should be our goal.
Okay. So the difference is what I was talking about. Like Rucker and I have a similar perspective to the importance of work, and how remuneration should not play the part it currently plays under our capitalist structure, and how that is currently immoral. The fact that we work on subsistence wages, or the fact that we work to survive, is broken, and that our level of productivity has increased to a point where we could justify a 15-hour work week rather than the current 40 to 80.
Well, we could reduce a
80-hour work.
Okay, well, I don't know who's the fuck's working 80 hours. The average work week in America is like 44 hours, so that just seems like a weird. You're just throwing that number in. We could definitely operate at a reduced work week. I don't know about 15 an hour or 15 hours, but okay.
That we have.
It seems like you're prescribing a lot of of your own beliefs onto what he said. Fundamentally, you guys might agree, but when you move more into depth, it seems like you guys disagree. He said UBI. He probably doesn't give a shit about necessarily how we get it as long as it's a net gain.
The reason why I say that I agree with Rucker Bregman's perspective on UBI is because I agree with his worldview. And the worldview that he has is that the wealthy need to do more to pay back what they owe to society.
But you even admitted that Andrew Yang's UBI would be the wealthy paying more back, but the poor people would still have to pay into it, but wealthy people would pay more. You've literally said the words. Yeah, wealthy people will probably pay more money, but still.
Now, he has a lighter approach than I do. His approach is, hey, let's eradicate tax loopholes, let's eradicate tax avoidance, and let's reintroduce this kind of money back in.
And my perspective is like it's hard to do those things. So if we implemented a VAT tax, which is very difficult for corporations to dodge in the first place, then the government still gets their money, which is the desired outcome, and you'll still lose business if you have to pay more. If a particular good costs more money, then people are less likely to buy it overall, right? So if like the cost of something goes up by 10%, the business itself will get like fewer, whatever. They'll get fewer people to buy into it. The government will get more money. People will pay into it. That company won't be as rich. Yada yada yada.
Into the economy rather than allow the wealthy to hoard it in offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands and blah blah blah. My perspective is that a more drastic redistribution is an absolute necessity, given the fact that all of this wealth is generated because of labor. Capital on its own cannot generate more capital. You have to work it. Okay. And in order to work it, you need laborers. You need workers.
Half this video is just anti-capitalism.
Surplus value. That's why whenever people say like, oh, well, this is a billionaire's, the billionaire created their wealth on their own, they're completely incorrect. They're objectively incorrect. There is no such thing as a self-made billionaire. I love that at this point in the conversation, usually there's one or two people that turn around and say, well, what about J.K. Rowling? Well, it's not like J.K. Rowling made $1 billion by writing on fucking napkins one by one. I'm
so confused what's happening. It's like the last 5 minutes is just like a virtue signal towards like, oh, capitalism bad. Nobody works for their own stuff. I'm going to remove all the nuance from these conversations, blah, 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 blah.
She sat inside of. She had publishers. She had editors that took a chance on her. She had factories full of workers that.
Yeah, and then she had raw talent that made her a better writer, and she had talent that made her a good writer, and she was interested in an interesting topic that people bought into.
Were writing the books, and then distributing them out. She had delivery people that were fucking shipping the books off.
But like, if you put me in her position, I would fail, right? So like, she's still better than me, right? Especially at least in this context.
This is the same concept over and over again.
Like, capitalism generally will try to take the better people who are better for society. It doesn't mean that they're better overall, but better for society, and prop them up more. That's what the kind of capitalism we need, while we also help poor people enough to be put in a position where they could be those people if they got reasonable education and a not crazy stressful life.
This is the hidden collectivism.
I'm sorry. I'm out of control. I apologize.
Thank you. This is the hidden collectivism that works behind closed doors, invisible to the naked eye, that we take for granted under our capitalist structure. This is how wealth is created. This is why whenever people say like, oh no, billionaires deserve that wealth and we're actually stealing it from them if we tax.
Very few people say that. Like, even most conservatives don't believe. Most conservatives even believe that like we need to tax the wealthy more. But like, you guys don't really say tax the wealthy as much as you say like, let's just kind of implement socialism, and then people don't like that. Like Cuban people don't like that because they see how terrible it is. And they're like, you know what? Maybe ideally these things are great, but in practice, I lost my home. So I think maybe we stay away from that.
Tax them at higher rates and it's inappropriate. That's an incorrect perspective. I don't understand how people sit around and say taxation is theft, but they don't understand or they don't admit that all profit is theft in that same regard. If you are generating all of this profit with your surplus value, if you're generating all the surplus value with your labor.
Well, no, I think both people are stupid. I think if you think that profit fundamentally is theft and you think taxes are fundamentally theft, then you're kind of ignorant, right? Like, honestly, it comes down to like your perspective on the way that money is drawn out. It kind of blows my mind a little bit, right? Either way, like, yeah, you're having money taken away from you for a particular thing. In the case of profit, it's not a bad thing that there's profits. Like, it's a good thing. Companies should make a profit because they can continue to build their own successful business. If your business is successful, you're doing something right. You should have the additional profit to be able to continuously build that thing, and you should be able to get a payoff for the risk that you put into a particular business. Now, it doesn't mean that you needed a crazy profit margin that fucks people like Amazon. But yeah, and then when it comes to taxes, you take taxes and you redistribute that wealth. Problem is that our current redistribution of wealth and our current welfare system is dog shit, and it's not really doing what it needs to do. Right? So our current profit system is probably abusive, especially for bigger businesses. But our current tax system is also terrible.
And then your boss gets to do whatever the fuck he wants with it. And more often than not, that surplus value just goes back into his pockets in the form of profits, or goes back into the profits of private capital owners who have never even stepped foot inside of your fucking bookmaking factory or your bread factory or whatever kind of fucking work you're creating or whatever kind of output you're generating. Then how is that a fair system? And it's not. But the people that work for them gain because the rich give them work. Is that not right? Yeah. You understand how authoritarian you sound, right? When you say the rich are giving us the work, we should just be grateful for it.
Yeah, like not that we should just be grateful, but like, yes, we're getting work from other people who have taken the risk. So that's something that's nice for us. We don't have to take as much of a risk. It doesn't justify abusive profits, but profits in and of itself aren't abusive.
The reason why I mentioned
I don't deserve to own half of like a bus company in my local area just because I work for that bus company, or a percentage. I don't deserve to own part of that. I didn't pay for the buses. I don't pay for anything. If I get in a fucking car crash, I don't pay for it. You understand that? Like, if I work for a company and something happens that's within like my job, and it's happened to me before. I've hit somebody at my job when I was working at the bus company. I didn't have to pay for it. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't have a lot of the risk. As long as I'm working reasonably within my own like field, I'm risk-free. But the company is fully at risk to get the fuck suit out of them, which they did. So, like, let's keep it in perspective a little bit.
The reason why I mentioned how profit is theft and the rich need to give back more is because that is how we need to pay for UBI. The only way UBI would work is if it was a drastic redistribution of wealth.
I think that Hassan doesn't only understand the words like only. Like, the only way this will work. But your solution is too expensive and doesn't deal with the problems of our conditional welfare system.
From the top that has hoarded all of the wealth and all of the power back down to the workers, the people that are generating that wealth, and even those who aren't working, even those who are not able to work, strictly on the virtue that they are human beings and therefore special snowflakes.
Well, a lot of people that can't work just don't want to work because some of them are lazy. Like, I think that we need to stop this framing of everybody on welfare is like altruistic. Like, a lot of them are shit. I have family on welfare. No offense to my family, but you know, I see it firsthand. Some of them simply don't want to work. Not everybody is a great guy.
That deserve not to die. I hope this was a little bit more descriptive of my perspective on UBI.
It was not.
I don't think of that works. And the reason why I'm disappointed with Andrew Yang is because UBI is supposed to be his main campaign policy proposal.
That's a great one.
The entire reason why he's running for president is to normalize the concept of a universal basic income. So if this is his main proposal, and his main proposal is just basically the most neoliberal perspective you could have on universal basic income that seeks to take away existing welfare payments from people who rely on them, people who depend on them, and just give them cash to bribe them off of the welfare payments, rather than addressing the structural issues that put them in this position in the first place, rather than addressing the material conditions in which the poor are destined to a lifetime of poverty.
Wow, really nice. One of the conditions that was created was a loss of low-skilled labor to allow people to generate generational wealth. At the end of the day, hopefully Hassan has changed his perspective on this because it's horrible. I don't think he understands UBI. I don't think he understands a lot of the words he uses. And honestly, after watching this video now and looking at other political commentators on YouTube political commentators are they're terrible. These people need to get a real job and work in the workforce for a while and get some real world experience before talking on issues because very clearly they have very privileged, entitled perspectives. And I noticed that there is a direct correlation with never having to earn anything in your life and having really dog shit takes when it comes to most things. Hey everyone, if you liked that video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And don't forget to follow my Twitch, Instagram, Twitter, Discord, and TikTok. All links are in the description. Also, check out my Patreon if you'd like to support me even more than you already do. Thank you so much, everyone. I love you all.